Runeterra, episode 21.1. I'm your host, Ryan, here with your other host, Hetch.
Like, we finally break into the 20s, we get to 21, and now we're just point one. Like, is this it? Is this how it ends?
You gotta maintain the high, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tune in next week to find out.
So what is point one? If no one has seen our other point one episode, which was for the Spirit Blossom event, the point one episodes or point X are where we, go kind of outside the realm of what we usually do when talking about the story or the lore of Runeterra, where we look at some of the patch notes that are impactful or have some major things that are going to kind of change the game, usually for the better. So for this one, we have patch 1.10 and some mentions of 1.11, which we'll talk about at the end, which will be coming in the next couple of weeks, which we might do as well. Who knows? We'll see. But we've had some changes to some champions, some followers, etc., and then also a new mode to talk about, which could have some impact on the future tournament structures coming down the pipeline. So it looks like they're thinking about it. But we're going to start off with Ezreal. Do you want to tell them about the changes to Ezreal?
So this is a change that I think a lot of people were really, especially at my wood tier bracket, that a lot of people were bringing up, which is Ezreal looking at any kind of nerf, and he's finally getting one. So Ezreal is now, his level up requirement is changing from 8 targeted enemies to 10 targeted enemies. And good. Like, I know that I've complained at least on the show one time before, but I complain about it to a lot of friends when I'm trying to get newer people to try out the game, that Ezreal's win con is non-interactive as far as when you build around it properly. And anything that's non-interactive can be a really, really discouraging to newer players or inexperienced card game players. So, this nerf was something that I think a lot of people saw coming.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it, how we always tie things back to lore. Ezreal's privileged, and he's had the privilege of, for this long, being untouched and having everything around him be destroyed, like Heimer. And it's good to see that they finally said, okay, let's push this back a bit, even though Ezreal wasn't that prominent on the top tier kind of stuff. But I think that was more due to the addition of so many new cards, where the breadth of decks being played got larger, the pool size got larger, but he's still very dangerous in the right hands.
I'm happy too that it's not like, in the grand scope of things, this is not a major nerf, because they're like, one of the biggest ways that people were abusing Ezreal was combining him with the Buildwater cards like Make It Rain, because all of a sudden it's like, haha, +3 to Ezreal level up off of one spell. So this isn't a heavy nerf hammer, because at the end of the day, Ezreal decks are still combo decks, and combo decks do take skill to do. It's not as easy as just play card, I win. So it's a good change. I do like this one.
Yeah. So this takes us to the next one, which is a big standout. The only other champion that got touched, which was Lee Sin. So it turns out Lee Sin was the least played champion, which we've seen that kind of light up their radars before. Shen is a good example of that. And it was just, he was too high costed for the decks he needed to be in that fit his archetype. So what they did was they changed his cost from 6 to 4. They changed his health from 6 to 4, and his level up still works the same. So it adds +1/+1. And then they changed his level up trigger from 7+ spells to you now need to cast 8+ spells. And the addition on top of that was they swapped out Dragon Rage, which was his champion spell, and put in Sonic Wave, because it fit a lot better into his motif of casting multiple spells per turn, and it fits once again better into the archetypes that he wants to fit in. Now this, as we're seeing already in the aftermath, is more pushed than it looks on paper. A lot of decks are popping up with him in the Targon region that are doing some major damage, where you immediately have some counter decks being built. This morning, Magwai was testing out a Ashe Misfortune deck, which actually looks pretty good. I'm probably going to play later this afternoon, which is made to face this deck, and it still has trouble. So
I'm honestly surprised that like he didn't end up trying to bring back like the Freljord Noxus Ash deck that he was
yeah,
running before, as far as just like to directly counter
yeah,
one other deck. But I this change surprised me because when I first looked at it, I did not think that it would be a big enough thing
hmm
to really push Lee into the spotlight.
yeah,
And this also goes like in line with some of the other changes with cards that we'll get into later. But like the reason I didn't think it would be big is because they nerfed his health.
yeah,
And we even on this show where we talk about lore, we talk about the importance of a big butt.
yeah.
The Anaconda don't want none unless you got buns, hun. All right, so health is such an important stat, especially with something with a creature with Challenger.
Yeah.
And when I saw this, I was like, well, you nerf the health. No one's gonna play this. But the change to the Sonic Wave being his unique spell,
Yeah.
it was like, oh man, I should have put that into perspective of these like, okay, you played Lee Sin, I have time. Oh no. You had a Sonic Wave and a Lee Sin in hand,
yeah.
and already you're halfway to level up. Oh no. Like I
It's
made
super
mistakes.
dangerous. Yeah, so we'll see what happens there. It could be a case where it's still fairly new change, so people need to get used. Since I mean, if he was the lowest played champion and he immediately shot up to now one of the most played post nerf, it takes some adjustment to do for the meta to kind of adjust around him. And now that we're done with the champions, I want to say that we messed up. We forgot the housekeeping at the top. So now we have to put it in the middle, all weird and like it's like this surreal other dimension. But yeah, you can listen to us anywhere if you're not already listening. Make sure to follow us on Twitter to keep up to date on episodes, especially the point one episodes, right? Since those will kind of fall in between your major episodes. That's at Podcast Core. That's COR. And you can send an email to podcastcore@gmail.com. And we have gotten emails with people showing their appreciation, which is awesome.
Yeah, we've only been doing this for a little over 20 episodes. There's no way we're gonna mess up the order.
Right. So thanks everyone out there who sent emails, and maybe in the future we can do email sections. We'll see where time permits. But now we're going to move on to some followers that got touched, which is War Chefs. War Chefs, a very popular card in any creature-focused deck, got its power nerfed from 2 to 1, which makes sense here. I've played War Chefs for a while now, right? I think everybody has who's been in any Bannerman shell or anywhere close to it, because it curved so well, and that 2 health definitely allowed it to get some favorable trades, or even when, because War Chefs has to be answered, right, in those decks. So when your opponent's forced to answer it, they're forced to pay that extra price on damage, despite that the thing it's supporting is getting buffed. And with the addition of other support cards with Targon, it makes sense that this will get pulled back in line to fit.
Not to mention too that like the support cards from Targon, like stat wise, were not nearly as valuable as War Chefs. And it's like, oh well, they're not as valuable because they grant instead of just for the turn. But it was like, no, these like there's a 3-mana 1/1 in Targon that does actually see play. Like we can tone War Chefs down. So I think Targon just highlighted how good this card was.
Yeah, so that's pretty solid. I know for me, I moved down the count of how many I play, and some decks I'm trying without it to see if it, how much of an impact it was. I was always like a 2 of guy. I was never a full 3 of War Chefs guy. But the next one up to bat here was Flash of Brilliance, which this one has probably been touched the most.
Yeah. Let me first just gush a little bit here. All right, I can finally bring back one of my first degenerate decks that I played with when this game was still in beta, which is Ezreal and Lux. I can finally play it because of the value of having 2 Flashes of Brilliance in hand and playing them both for basically no mana, getting your Lux spells, because it's like, okay, here's 2 spells that'll trigger Lux, but I play both of them at burst speed to also trigger Lux and get my laser. Yes, please. Yes,
So you're back on track.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah, so that going back from 4 to 3 now, I think fits. There's plenty of other spells that are dangerous. It's one of those things where the pool's getting larger, so it's less of a standout. But it will see some comeback. I still saw people playing it.
And the bottom line is that it's still only giving you a 6+ mana spell too. It's not. This isn't going back to like the beta days where you're getting a random spell from the region and you could get something dumb like, oh, I got to deny. GG, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of getting something dumb, Yordle Grifter got updated. Got his nab changed. You want to tell him about that real quick?
This one is such a big hit to anything playing Plunder, because Yordle Grifter used to be Allegiance nab 1. And on the play, you get a warning shot, which is the 0 mana, deal 1 damage to the enemy nexus. So now the change is that the Allegiance is nab 1 and the warning shot. The warning shot is no longer guaranteed. It is no longer a separate effect. So if you want to get the warning shot, you have to have the Allegiance trigger. And any deck that was playing Plunder, this was an auto include in those decks. Not even for the Allegiance trick. Like, it was not an auto include because of the nab. It was an auto include because it gave you your warning shot without having to put a 0 mana spell in your deck. And now that's already like, now it has to be around the Allegiance, and that's going to be like, there's going to be so many Plunder decks like the way that they're built right now that are gonna have to adjust. Like, that's just a fact, and it's honestly a huge hit. But
so we'll see how that gets affected in the upcoming decks, because Plunder's kind of, or that those decks have kind of waned off with the changes to how nab worked. But we're gonna finish up here with a Targon special. So, since we're just kind of finishing up our Targon region champions in earlier episodes, if you haven't listened to them, go listen to them, and then listen to every episode before that, because that's how it works.
Start at episode 1. You don't want to get those spoilers.
So Cygnus, the Moonwalker, and if you don't remember what that card does, because no one does, it has Nightfall, give me and an ally elusive this round, and it's had its power shifted from 4 to 5, and its health shifted from 2 to 3. I still don't know where this card fits. I think it just fits at the top end of a elusive deck, but everything in an elusive deck has elusiveness. So maybe because it can give an ally elusive, you give it to your champion, right? So if you have like a Zed in there or something like that to finish them off, you can do that, and then Zed's shadow will inherit it, and then blah blah blah.
And I'd always assumed that this was going to be like their intended goal was to make this the finisher for your Nightfall decks, not so much elusives.
Okay.
Because like the list that I had been seeing the most was one that Mogwai made popular for Diana and Nocturne. And the top end of that deck is 4 mana. Like, it's very low to the ground, because the idea is to level up your Nocturne and then just trigger Nocturne like 4 times in one turn.
That deck is oppressive. I've played against it too many times.
So I think their goal was always to make this the top end, but the way that Nocturne works is if you're doing that where you're triggering him 4 times in a turn for the one big swing, it doesn't matter that your stuff has elusive, because they all get fear around Nocturne. So it is good to see that they are paying attention to the card, though, and like going back to how important health is, that this buff was, a +1/+1, whereas like some of the other changes that, aren't really too impressive, like Crackshot Corsair and Jagged Taskmaster, like their healths were also adjusted. That's one of the to me, that's the stat that I'm going to look at the most, because it is important. But like this one is, maybe we'll see something kind of fancy. Like I kind of want to see about building something dumb and trying to give Trundle elusive.
No, I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you right there, because I don't want that idea getting out. So we're gonna move into we're gonna wrap up the episode here with talking about the biggest thing. There's some other things mentioned in here. like the new lab and etc. But we want to focus on the standard Gauntlet update where they're introducing multi-deck pick and ban. So this is amazing because, first of all, how does it work, right? So what it is you enter a lobby just like you would enter any ranked game, and you get to pick 3 decks on your way entering. And then once you pick those 3 decks, you queue up, you get an opponent, you pick one of their decks to ban, they pick one of your decks to ban, and then of your 2 remaining choices, you pick which deck you want to play in that match. And that will happen every game you play. That's really cool to me. And that's something that kind of signifies the future tournament structures, right? Because there's been a lot of talk about, should tournaments start yet? Is the game ready for tournaments? Is the game ready for tournaments? And I don't think not yet. I think it needs more cards for one. So once we get more cards out there, the balance, cadence, and everything is really good. And you also want a company to be able to support the tournament structure if they're going to do it, right? So if the focus is on the game, let the focus stay on the game. Once it gets in a place where they're like, hey, we have plenty, then they can focus on that. But some additions to the deck ban, what they're playing with is the rules, right? So one of the rules is no champions duplicated between decks, right? That's another cool one to introduce more creativity. Different region combinations for each deck, so you can't double the combinations even if you're using different champions. And then maximum 1 championless deck, which is also a cool include because it's treating, like you either vote or you don't vote. It's like you get to choose not to use a champion, but that still counts as using a champion, right? It's a good.
And it's also
addition.
encouraging to see that like they are addressing issues that have come up with like with Twitch rivals and some of the the fan created tournaments that had started up. That they're addressing some of the issues that popped up there, because that one, like going into it, they had to go and like kind of retcon things of like, oh well, mono region decks and like, so they already have an idea of addressing issues that might pop up. And it shows that they are thinking about trying to create an environment that's healthy for competition. And granted, I joined a podcast called The Casuals of Runeterra, so
but this fits right in your wheelhouse as a Dota guy when it comes to some picks and some bans.
Oh man,
right?
okay, wait, that's a whole different topic. But yeah, no, like being able to like see what you're going up against and then trying to get into your opponent's head as far as with your bans and stuff, like that is something that fascinates me. And I do like to see, because even with Hearthstone, like they never showed it on screen, but a lot of the Hearthstone tournaments was a very similar thing of like 3 decks, ban a deck. And like that's fascinating to me because it just gives you so much insight, perceived insight as far as like what what this player's thinking about, what he's worried about, what they think their deck is strongest at, what they think their deck is weakest at. It gives you so many ways to just theory craft about the game. It's so little things like that is fun to me. But it gives people the
structure. It gives your casual players, because that's who we're here for. It gives you guys a structure to get used to what you would see if you decide to go the tournament route, right? Where you're gonna have to have this kind of approach to figuring out the suite of stuff you're gonna bring to a tournament, and then being able to play everything well, but then being able to adjust on the fly while reading your opponent, like you said. But so that's cool that's introduced, and there's some other things in here. But for this episode, I think that's it.
Just an honorable mention, since I am a degenerate casual.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, cue up your Guns N' Roses riff. I am ready to be welcomed to the jungle.
Oh yeah, tell about it.
Like that, because I mean, that one just seems silly. Like you're going, like it's the lab experimental decks combined with vulnerable units that you have no control over what you or your opponent gets. It's like, what in the world is happening? Yes. Like I don't see
directly into my veins.
It's like I don't see that myself like going crazy, like hardcore into the jungle games, but I'm hopping in on that stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a cool approach. Somebody who's not really in the labs much. I can't wait to see what you end up doing in that. So that'll be interesting to give the updates on every so often.
I'm excited to bring the stories.
So as always, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll be back soon with the next episode.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.